Welcome to a episode of Crowdsource Politics Talks. Today I am joined by my guest co-host Tiberius D. Tiberius D, welcome. Thank you for joining and agreeing to be a co-host for this stream. And we are joined by immigration attorney, employment attorney, Jenny Hobbs. Jenny, thank you for coming today to discuss immigration and all that entails.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Glad to be here.
So for people that may not know you, Jenny, because I know that Tiberius's community isn't really familiar with you, and I know sure some people might pop in just in general might not know who you are. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, talk a little bit about yourself like we did previously, and then we can get into just having a nice little round table discussion about everything immigration.
Sure. So I'm an immigration attorney practicing in New York City. I've been practicing for about 16 years. My practice area is focused on employment-based immigration, so helping employers bring people here or help them get green cards for people, helping people who individually want to come here, maybe entrepreneurs or people with some kind of extraordinary ability. I also do cases for family-based immigration, and I don't really do much humanitarian work or deportation defense. I know your other guest was more focused on those, but I can speak to those a little bit as well.
Great.
Speaking of other guests, our Nate is in the waiting room.
Oh, thank you. All right, I'll go back, drag him in. Where is it at? Is he? I don't see him.
He must have dropped. He was just there.
Oh.
He was just in the guest waiting room.
Oh no.
Oh man. Give me just a second. There, he's in the hangout now.
Okay, good. All right. Perfect.
We apologize for the technical difficulties.
If it wasn't technical difficulties, it wouldn't be amateur streamers on Twitch.
I think we're a little past amateur at this point. We know what we're doing.
Yeah.
Do we blame the guests on this one? Is that what we do? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, you can blame me. This is my fault.
It's all good.
Hi, Nate.
Nate, welcome. So we were just getting to introductions. Jenny introduced herself, so I don't know if you caught that, but
hi, Jenny. I'm Nate. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Hi, Nate. It's nice to meet you.
So got two immigration attorneys with us today, so this should be a good talk. Nate, if you are prepared to go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience, in case people do not know who you are, go for it.
Yeah, I'm Nate Dallon. I do immigration work in Omaha, Nebraska. It's removal and criminal all day, every day. That's what we do.
All right. And so Tiberius and I have known Nate for a bit of time. Tiberius longer than I have. I've known Jenny for a long time. We're in various Facebook communities together, and I felt that if I could get the two of you together to talk about immigration, it'd be a banger of a show. And so I'm glad that we were able to find the time to get you both on this program. This program tonight is designed generally to talk about all things immigration with two people that are they're essentially experts on the subject. So we'll let this be kind of a freewheeling dealing conversation, kind of go where it goes. I'll structure it a bit with some questions, and I'm sure Tiberius, the co-host, will have some questions as well. But feel free to talk about anything and everything that revolves around immigration. So one of the first things I think that we should talk about, though, and this is something that Nate is very intimately familiar with, given his line of work, is what is going on with the border. Now, Jenny, I know that you have thoughts, opinions on it, but that's not your necessarily line of work. But please, feel free to jump in with anything that you want. But Nate, why don't you go ahead and kick us off with some of that newest information that we have from the border?
Yeah, just that every month is a new record for detentions at the U.S.-Mexico border. There was a really sad case yesterday where I think 46 different migrants were stuffed into some sort of a container on a truck and cooked to death because we have a very hot summer in northern Mexico, southern Texas, and Arizona and California. The situation has been difficult for I don't know, really since 2012. The border hasn't been sufficiently manned to be able to quickly and effectively take intakes for people who have credible fear of returning to their home country and putting them into the system. Even with this Title 42 stuff, which is Title 42 of the U.S. Code, which allows the government to just do immediate expulsions based upon a health crisis in the United States. Even with that kind of authority, they still don't have the manpower to actually process the people who can get past that step and still actually have a shot at trying to get asylum or some other form of relief in the U.S. And so we just have a combination of two really bad situations, a really chaotic, not very good and archaic system at the border, plus an enormous influx of human beings who are interested in coming to the United States, and they're meeting the system that's old, archaic, and stupid. And so when you have huge volume with a lot of stupid all at the same place, all we really hear about every day is tragedy. And I think that sadly, that's likely to be the situation going forward. I don't have a lot of hope that either Congress or the executive can fix this, even if the Biden administration had Congress, well, maybe if they had Congress, they could do something. But even if they had carte blanche for their executive authority, the courts have been so bad at letting them make changes, given the circumstances on the ground. I just don't. I have no reason to think that we're going to get anything productive to sort of clean up the mess as I see it. We could talk about what the goals should be, like what should we do? But I don't think anybody is happy with what the situation at the border is right now. But I think that's what we're going to remain at for many months. Like I would anticipate at least 20 more months of this.
Yeah, it is a very sad situation, especially because we have both push and pull factors coming in from immigration. And this is where I think Jenny can offer her expertise on this topic, because we have almost record low unemployment again. And so, we have the entire pool of the great structure of the American economy in general that are pulling immigrants towards the United States, as well as the facts on the ground in places like Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, what is the Northern Triangle? Tiberius, help me out. What's the Northern Triangle? What's the triangle? Nicaragua? Is that the other country I couldn't think of? Okay. And so we have, my bad. So we have all this, push-pull situation coming in. And so, Jenny, what are your thoughts about like the employment situation? How are you seeing it from like the different perspective of like immigrants coming into the country, given the situation we're in right now?
Well, the U.S. government tends to favor highly skilled immigration. From the business employment or the employment-based perspective, they don't really have a lot of options for people who want to come in, who are unskilled workers, for example. And I also suspect a lot of undocumented people left the U.S. during COVID because those restaurants were closed, the construction wasn't happening, they weren't employed, and so they left. So I think when you're hearing some of these restaurants, for example, saying nobody wants to work, it's because that's the only line they have, because they don't want to admit that they were employing undocumented people before. And they can't get anyone to work there for the wage and the work conditions that they're offering. So that's one factor.
That's interesting.
And then another factor is it's really difficult to get a visa right now. It's still really difficult. I think we had something like 8 million visas a year or so. We may have even reached as high as 13 million before COVID. And last year, it was somewhere around 2 million visas issued in 2021. Consular posts were closed because of COVID. And when they reopened, it was very slow reopening. And that was in part due to the Trump, or almost entirely due to the Trump administration.
Gotcha.
The Trump administration, when he went into office, he stated a goal of cutting legal immigration in half, which, we heard a lot about illegal immigration, but we didn't hear as much about that. He was successful. We saw huge attrition in all the agencies that work on immigration, and especially the Department of State lost something like 400 or 500 seasoned officers. So As a result, when they started reopening, they also lost a lot of local people who were working for the embassies locally. A lot of them died of COVID. So what ended up happening is they can't ramp back up again for issuing visas. One thing we're seeing is very few appointments for entrepreneurs. The investment visa, E2, E1, a lot of posts aren't issuing those at all anymore. And we're also seeing really slow availability of appointments. Business visitors in some cases are having to wait until 2024 to get an appointment. Yeah. In a lot of cases, they're still processing cases, employment-based cases from 2020 for like e-visas, for example. And the posts that are functioning well, I mean, there's a few in Asia that are functioning pretty well. They're kind of the exception. Germany maybe is another one. We're just seeing huge backlogs, and people just aren't able to get their visas. So the people who are already here, switching jobs, etc., they're in high demand. But, you know, I guess the attitude with the investor visa is that maybe they don't really want to prioritize that because they don't even have the people to fill the jobs that they're going to be opening up in the U.S. economy.
Interesting. I have a
question.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say, is there a general like labor shortage across all of USCIS and Department of State, you think?
I heard USCIS has a shortage of like 20% or something like that. And they're looking to fill those numbers by the end of the year. But I don't know
how.
Exactly. I don't know how they're going to do it.
Maybe they could hire some of my clients. The great irony, right?
They should.
Well, I ask because, I mean, I'll tell you, so just on the legal side, the stuff that I do for people who already have status, like if you do an I-90, so if you're just renewing a green card, I'm having people do it, you know, the full, 120 days early, and then they're still taking the full year to get their green cards updated. And I mean, I've had to do info passes for people just to get stamps in their passport so they can continue to travel, right? And that to me sort of indicates that there must be a labor shortage. And then same thing, N400s are still taking 5, 6, 7 months in Omaha to get interviewed, and they're supposed to be the priority cases. I've got a couple of students that married USCs. We put in, you know, their ALS paperwork back in September of last year. We still don't have interviews. And so to me, all of that just indicates that there must be an enormous labor shortage, let alone, you know, work permits. That's another huge part of my life. The extension on those is up to 540 days because they can't issue cards within a calendar year. And so I just wonder if the labor shortage is actually much worse than we have even heard. And I wonder if Mayorkas would like to talk about it, but has been told not to because they don't want to cause a panic.
I mean, that's possible. One thing really quick. There's a lot of jargon going on. I'm not a lawyer. I'm sure Tiberius is not a lawyer. I know their audience isn't. So if you could like maybe tweak the acronyms just a little bit so that it's a little more understandable. I got the gist of what you were saying, but some of the you know, the visas you were talking about and USC's, I guess that's a United States citizen. Just to make it a little bit easier to understand, please.
So I want to actually riff off of one of the points that Nate just made, which I think is a great point. So he was referencing work permits, which is something called an employment authorization document. It's issued in a number of different situations, including for people who have an asylum case pending, people who have a family-based green card case filed, and while they're waiting for these to be adjudicated, they apply for these work permits. They're absolutely crucial, as I'm sure you can understand. I mean, how is the person going to make a livelihood while they're waiting for their immigration benefits? It's also issued to people who just graduated from some U.S. institution and who are waiting to get some other kind of work visa. It kind of fills the gap. Well, there used to be a regulation that promised that these would be adjudicated within 90 days, as well they should be. And immigration told us that that was unnecessary. and that they were going to meet their benchmarks without the regulation. They got rid of the regulation. And Nate, I don't know if you know any more of the background behind that, because I'm not exactly sure if there's some special story there, but they haven't. And in fact, in some cases, they're taking more than a year, as Nate has mentioned.
Wow.
And so these poor people are basically, they have the option either work unauthorized, work under the table, or don't work at all. And how are they going to support themselves? We really haven't experienced any kind of humanitarian or empathetic response from the government when we try to issue or when we try to request an expedite, because this is something that is supposedly available. I haven't had much success with expedites. I don't know if you have, Nate, and I haven't heard other practitioners having success with this. So it's just like a black hole. I mean, it's really the government is forcing people to work undocumented or starve.
I do have a question, because I think this ties back into something that you said in like your first little spiel, Jenny, is that you said there was a lot of attrition in government at the State Department and other agencies. And I'm sure that this is also probably that happened in Nate's line of work as well. Do you think that this was by design, sort of, to like tamp down on immigration going forward into the future if another president came into the line? Or is this just kind of what happens when people quit and the jobs don't fill up? Like, you know.
So there's a few stories there. I mean, first of all, we have the State Department, which, I mean, I think we all know, if we were watching Congress during the Trump administration, we all know how Trump felt about the State Department. And, you know, there were certain individuals who were basically forced out. It wouldn't surprise me if that was very widespread. So that's one issue that has come up. I mean, people have retired. They disagreed with the policies of the Trump administration, so it may have been personal decisions in a lot of cases. And one of the problems with that is these are highly trained individuals. I mean, they have to take a test that they have to study for, and then, you know, they might be there for decades. And so when you lose them, to replace them, it could take a decade or longer. So that's one issue that we're seeing, and especially some of these visas that I've been talking about, where you're kind of like reviewing it. You almost have to have like a business degree to understand these visas well enough to decide which is the right one to approve or not. So that's one situation. And then another, you have USCIS, which I think is manned by contractors going way back, maybe entirely by contractors. And it just seems like they kind of treat that workforce as completely elastic and, you know, in a very cavalier manner. And it's fee-based. It's 100% fee-based. So just like the post office, you know, when there's some group in power that doesn't like big government, they say that government has to pay for itself. And if they're not making enough money because they're not profitable, which is pretty counterintuitive for a government agency, then they cut their staff. Well, then they can't adjudicate the cases, and it doesn't match up what's going on with the economy or humanitarian crises, etc.
Gotcha. Nate, thoughts on that? On my question?
It's hard to tell when it's, you know, like malcontent or just deep stupidity. I mean, like,
fair enough.
This is hard for me. I mean, I'm serious about this because I've given this a lot of thought. Like, how much of this was intentional versus how much of this was just we are so deeply stupid that we're a mess. And I can't parse that. I can tell you though, the entire federal government atrophied, and all of the instabilities inside of the government really came to the fore during the Trump administration because they just refused to staff most of the government. I mean, we're talking right now about the Department of State, the Department of Justice, and the Department of Homeland Security. But it was all of them. I mean, the Department of Energy didn't get covered, right? Department of Health and Human Services. I mean, but some of those were supposed to get political appointees, and they never came. I mean, Trump didn't have a transition team between Obama and the Trump administration. I mean, the Romney-Obama transition, if Mitt Romney had won, it was like a match made in heaven. It was like the best bureaucrats the Democratic Party had ever produced with the best business people that the Republican Party had ever produced. They were like ready to go. There was like 2 functioning governments going into November 2012. And then by January 1st, 2017, Trump still hadn't reached out to the Obama people. Yeah. To like, just like, here's how you do the jobs of the government. And so it was a top to bottom atrophy, like every problem that would been papered over by just expertise and good people working hard, all of the systemic issues in every department of government really surged forward. And I think the Biden administration walked in remembering the Obama days, and that was not what they received. And it's been a disaster, and there's been a worker shortage, and there's still, up until just recently, still been COVID restrictions. I mean, our federal building where USCIS and DOJ is housed combined in Omaha, they just yesterday opened up the DOJ side for public face-to-face contact without masks. And they were restricting people, like a room that was supposed to be for 30 was down to 6. I mean, we're middle of 2022 and that barely just switched. And so we've been in a situation where the system itself cannot handle the volume, even under good circumstances. And so can you say that this is, and like I said, I don't know if it's animus by Trump or if it's just deep stupidity. It's really hard to tell with him if he's just deeply stupid or sort of a mad genius. Like, I'm always going back and forth on that. But I think the Biden administration found that the workers just weren't available, and we just weren't able to ramp up despite their best efforts and some of their good intentions. The manpower and the system just can't do it. It's like we're trying to run like a 1980 Audi or something like that, and trying to get it back up to speed on the freeway. It just doesn't work. I don't care how hard you hit the gas; it just can't happen.
I want to take the opportunity to ask a question of myself, and I'm sorry, I can't remember your name, sweetheart. You wanted something, Jenny. I apologize. I need to write that down. Anyway, you were going to say something. I would like you to reply to that, but I do have a question for both of you.
So I was just going to add that CBP is probably the only agency that actually was staffed up. Looked into this actually a few months ago, and apparently they had double the workforce that they had during the first or the second Bush administration. So in 2001, they had about the same number of border apprehensions, but they had double the workforce. So just imagine, I mean, basically this like police force or quasi police force, federal police force, and just going rampant on the border. The only group that they're paying attention to, of course, because it really matches the rhetoric, right? But you know, they weren't vetting. That's the problem. I mean, there's definitely some bad stories about CBP agents committing crimes, and there's a lot of them. And I really suspect that they weren't going through a vetting process, the type that you should have for a government agency that's going to be involved with enforcement, that's going to be using weapons, and it's a really big problem. And those people are still in their jobs. It's not like Biden comes in and fires everybody. So he's dealing with the workforce that Trump gave him, and then making some changes along the way what he can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Obama did have a similar issue because there was the ramp up of CBP. Everybody knows what I'm getting at. Agents. Want to say it was Bush's second term, so it was around 2006, where they had a massive influx of CBE officers come in, and they had the same issues. They had issues with people involved in human trafficking, people involved in the drug trade, people involved in just all manner of shady shit, basically falling through the cracks because they were just like, we need like 100,000 officers today, just hire anybody. But Tiberius, you had a question that you wanted to ask. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I got a question for you both. Now, I've kind of talked about this with Nate because he's a regular on my show, but I still kind of want to revisit this, and that is, this is going to get political really quickly, but I do not see a coherent worldview or policy when it comes to immigration from either political party, and I can break that down a little bit. But the country doesn't seem to have any kind of idea what it wants to do with immigration. The political parties, if I'm going to be blatantly honest, seem to not want to know what they want to do. And to kind of put that in perspective for me, Democrats kind of were like 20 years ago, and now they're like very staunchly like, we need to have immigration. Republicans have almost completely flip-flopped to where they said they didn't like immigration, but the business cadre always said, yes, we want immigrants, we want to keep labor costs down, it helps out our overhead. And so you saw things like the Bush administration and their policy. So what I'm trying to get at is, and I want you guys to break this down. Number one, does anyone in the United States have a coherent worldview on immigration? And then when it comes to policy, can they actually make the rubber hit the road?
Nate, you want to take that?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. Ty already knows my opinion on this. The answer is no. I can't get a room of 5 people who are attorneys who work in the area to sit down and like make a plan that we can all agree on. Forget a bunch of congressmen and senators who have no idea what the system is, where it came from, or why we do what we do. They have no idea. The people who actually have to make the most important decisions have no clue. And I mean Congress. I'm talking senators, congressmen, and like tip of the hat to Biden. But my guess is if we sat down and started talking about visa caps with him, he's not going to know, right? Mayorkas is very competent. And that might be it. Like that's the whole of government. You might have a single person who has the expertise to at least converse. But like getting the caucus together to actually have an immigration plan that covers, I've jokingly said there's sort of 4 separate issues, right? Issue number 1 is what levels of immigration do you want to have, and what do those immigrants look like, right? Meaning like skilled, unskilled, etc. So like how many, what's your layer of legal immigration? 2, what does your border look like from a border security standpoint? 3, what do you do with the judicial backlog? We're knocking at 2 million active cases inside of the immigration courts. And then 4th, you have they're not on the radar at all, near 12 million people living in the United States who've never come into contact with the system at all. I can't get people to tell me one of the 4 things, what the solution is, let alone address all 4 simultaneously, which is probably what needs to happen. And so, like, I mean, the Republicans are a one-trick pony. Build the wall, be xenophobic. This makes no sense. It's not workable. Right? I jokingly say you build a wall and you create the infrastructure to make it easier for coyotes to get people inside the United States. Like it will actually work against your interests if you do that. So they're either really stupid or else they just like bumper stickers. I think it's both. And the Democratic Party, they really want to be humanitarian at the border, but I haven't seen an actual like, okay, and they talk about pathway to citizenship for DACA kids. And those are important pieces, but then it's like, okay, what do our immigration levels look like on a 5 and a 10-year horizon? What are the skilled or unskilled labor categories that we're going to have? How long do you want people to be here? How are we going to track these folks? Are you going to require people to leave the country, or are you going to let them be on a rolling basis? Are you going to get in with the business community? Right? Are you going to have to go sit down with the same people that Elizabeth Warren wants to break up because they're monopolies and like cut a deal with them so they can help track the workers? Right? There's a lot of devil bargains they're going to have to do to create a comprehensive program. And good luck. I like even Bernie Sanders. I don't know if he loves immigration. Like, I don't know. It's complicated.
That's a negative
like
there, good buddy.
Yeah, exactly. I like to think of people in terms of their interests and constituencies. So there's a lot of business people, both on the right and the left. And so they're going to definitely support employment-based immigration. They may very well support keeping people on a non-immigrant visa where they're kind of, still visitors here for as long as possible, because they want to have people maybe at a little bit of a disadvantage, or they want them to wait a little bit before they can get their green cards. I mean, I think that they're fully aware that people are, in a sort of a vulnerable position when they're not here with a green card or having a green card in process. And so I think you've got that group. And then I think that you've got, like, for example, church groups who are really interested in the humanitarian piece. And those church groups are usually affiliated with the right, but not always necessarily. I mean, there's definitely a lot of humanitarians on the left as well. So it makes for strange bedfellows. I think that when you look at the past and when we've had comprehensive immigration reform in the past, and I think it's been since 2001 or something. I don't think that we've been able to get together on this for that long. It's both parties. It's been bipartisan, and I'm not seeing a lot of bipartisanship right now. I mean, that feels like as impossible as pigs flying. And because of this strange kind of enmeshment of groups that's required in order to pass legislation in the past, nothing's going to happen. Nothing. I can tell you nothing's going to happen because we're more divided than we've been, I think, in years. And I don't see that improving anytime soon. And because of it, I mean, immigration is it's really operating in the interest of the people who want it to happen in the dark, the people who want to be paying under the table because they don't want to pay, the prevailing wage. And that's what's going to continue until the parties are able to work together.
And just from my perspective, I kind of lost hope. What was it, 2006, when the first comprehensive immigration bill was torpedoed by far right people in the Senate? And then it was done again in 2012. I want to say those are the correct years, because they didn't get their wall, or there wasn't some people wanted a pathway to citizenship, and other people were like, no, absolutely not. Going to be here always and forever as second-class citizens, for the most part. And so I just I don't see, like as with Jenny, I don't see anybody coming together and passing anything unless there's a super wave election or enough I don't know, enough Republicans get kicked out because they're in jail at this point.
Yeah, I'm also pessimistic on a lot of different levels. I think that the parties are sort of going through a process where they're trying to realign themselves and figure out what their core constituencies are going to be for the next 20 years. And so some of that has to get figured out before they can really decide. For example, and I think Jenny was just mentioning this, there's a shockingly large number of business interests in the Democratic Party, and they sort of are at odds with other parts of the Democratic Party, right? I mean, that's tough. It's a big tent party. And so you have to have people, reach across the ideological aisle inside the same tent. And those are hard conversations to have. I just wanted to mention, just because I saw it in one of Ty's chats, I just mentioned there were 12 million undocumented immigrants who are not inside the system. And the question is sort of like, obviously, well, how the frick would we know that, right? And I just wanted to mention that the Pew Research Institute has a partnership with two groups, the U.S. Census Bureau, as well as the IRS. So it turns out most of those 12 million people actually file tax returns each year, okay? I know that would cause people to sort of chuckle, like, well, then we should be able to go find them and round them up. But the IRS has explicit privacy things where it can't share the information that it has with the other agencies in the government. And so you have tens of millions of undocumented persons who have IRS or tax identification numbers. The U.S. Census Bureau tries really hard to go into known Hispanic areas and try to find people who are willing to talk to them and count, like, how many people are living in your home. And then the number ends up being a lot bigger than the number of people that we have green cards or work permits for. And then finally, Pew actually they go do word of mouth and telephone surveys, just trying to get a sense for what's going on. And then they take the three data sets, they try to merge them together. And in 2019, they put the number at 11.9 million. So I'm sort of juicing that number a little bit. There are other groups like the census itself. In 2018, they tried to come up with a number and they put it at 10.5 million undocumented persons living in the United States. So the answer to that question is, it is tough. It's not an exact science. Like, I wouldn't put a ton of money, but we know it's over 10 million people are living in the United States, working, going to school, etc. And lots of those people have U.S. citizen children because they've made families and they have kids who've been born here. And so it's a huge chunk of our country. I mean, that's 10 million people is a lot of people. I'm from Nebraska. We have like 2 million people total in the whole state. So, like, that's to my way of thinking, that's a lot of people. I know that's probably like one neighborhood in LA, but like where I'm at, that's a huge number of people, and we should be thinking about that.
Yeah, for sure. I do think that part of the notion that, and this isn't just an issue with the United States, is an issue globally with people thinking that immigrants will just go back to their home countries after living inside a country for 10 plus years. That's just not going to happen, because once you've been away from your home country for so long and have established a new life, the risk of going back, even if things are 100% stable, is not worth it, because you don't want to uproot the life that you've made for the potential of just being back in your home country. It's not going to happen. And I think people just need to realize that, and you realize the amount of pain and suffering forcing them back to a country that they have not cut ties with completely, but for all intents and purposes are no longer their country, and forcing them to go back. I don't know why that sense of not even compassion, just rationale doesn't break through to people.
Well, and you have to remember too, these countries, especially the ones that are in Central America, these countries are our neighbors, and there are geopolitical consequences to something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are probably I can't even remember. I know 10 years ago when I first started in this gig, there were 7 million Mexican Americans, and then probably 3 million more that were green card holders, plus the illegal population. So it was huge. If you were just to say we're going to expel all of these Mexicans back to Mexico, Mexico would have to take an influx of like 5, 6, 7 million people, right? I mean, that has a geopolitical consequence, and it's not good, right? And so like you just can't do that to your neighbors and expect it to be like, oh, it's fine, right? These are the country we do the most trade with on the planet is Mexico. It's like if we mess up that relationship or we destabilize their country by shoving people back into Mexico just because of some, like you were insinuating, a misplaced sense of legality or some such nonsense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I want to control my market and jack up my wages. I mean, heck, if you love how inflation's going now, wait till you get rid of all the illegals. Like, are you kidding me? Right? I mean, it's like a joke. You want to pay 20% more for every egg you eat just because we got to get the Mexicans out of here? Like, I mean, it's an insane proposition. It doesn't make very much sense. It's deeply anti-capitalistic, right? The right claims to be, the bearers of the free market. Yeah, right. I mean, it's a total joke. But I think the spillover effect for forcing people back into their home countries, especially at speed, it's completely unworkable. It would destabilize Mexico and Guatemala, and then you would quadruple the problem at the border.
Yep.
So like, I don't take those people seriously. If anybody, even mentions this, I just go, "Oh, so you're not a serious person. I shouldn't even talk to you." It's such a pathetic line of thought that it's a person who is just speaking a wish into the air. It's like me saying, "I can't wait till I get my lake on the moon," right? Like I can say those words, but like that's not a serious opinion or desire, and that's kind of how I see people like that.
Yeah, for sure. Jenny, I don't know how much you caught or if you had it on speaker or whatever. You catch all of it?
I did, and I
Okay.
I had a couple things I wanted to add. One, I mean, I completely agree with Nate. Another piece of that is remittances. There are certain countries where remittances, meaning the money that people make when they're in the U.S. and send back to their families in their home country, is a huge part of their economy. So
El Salvador is 20% of their GDP are those remittances. So yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Mexico has got a lot, the Northern Triangle, the Philippines. I mean, the remittances are, if they didn't have that, their economies would probably crash completely. So it would create a cycle that beyond anything you've ever seen in your life. So that's one thing. Another thing is, I mean, I don't know if we're still at replacement rate with our birth rate in the United States.
We're not.
We're not.
No.
And so, as the baby boomers are almost all done retiring, but there's still some left. The only way to continue to support these individuals so that they can retire at 65 or 67 or whatever it is right now is that you have enough people in the economy, which I don't know, if how far off we are from not having enough people in the economy that can continue working, continue paying taxes, paying into Social Security, paying into Medicare, so that they can afford to support these individuals who are now retired. And Japan has run into big problems to this effect. And if we're not able to replace our birth rate, then we are too, and it's going to be a disaster. I mean, basically what's going to happen is people are going to have to start retiring at a much older age. So I don't think they want that.
Right. No, that's 100%. Go ahead, Tiberius. Or who?
I really want to get on this. Okay, so For anyone who doesn't know who I am, I studied in economics, political science. I do geopolitical work. So I literally did a recording today about demography and how like the Europeans are literally becoming old folks home. They are already past the point of demographic replacement. And what I mean by that is they will not have as many people working as they have retirees in about 10 to 20 years, depending on which country we're talking about. Spain's a little further down the line. It's going to take them about 25. But Germany, as an example, about 12 years. And then they have as many people as retirees as they do have working. The Germans are good at math, but I don't know if they're going to figure out how to make that one work. The United States is going to never be 1-to-1 for at least the next 40 years. But it's something that we absolutely have to worry about because our population growth is the best out of the developed world. Only France is even comparative to us. And immigration puts us over. But if we don't have that conversation, Social Security has to go away. And I'm not going to say it isn't going to go away regardless because the millennials are mad, but that's a whole other conversation. So anyway, yeah, Japan's already past the point of no return. That's why they've been rolling out a recession since the 1990s. They will jump off the cliff first and probably literally in the next 5 years. And then everybody in California, or excuse me, a lot of countries follow suit, and it is definitely something that we have to chat about. But that's all I had to add to that. Thank you very much. I always like to do my little spiel. Cypher, I think you had a question that you were going to take up. Do next.
Yeah, so we're getting some comments in from the audience. Peacecraft is needling us a little bit, so I think it's important to bring it back home to a degree here. So Peacecraft had said that I'll just take one comment and throw it up on the screen really quick. Hopefully that did it. Oh, it's not working again. Oh, come on. Okay, anyway,
the big one
I'll just read it. Immigration's
okay.
a mixed bag. Our lower class has paid the cost because NAFTA gutted the Rust Belt. So to bring it back home, I wanted to ask Janie this. What are some of the ramifications of potentially expelling people from the United States in massive numbers that would actually negatively impact people's material conditions?
Well, I mean, what do you mean like if we were to expel people right now, and what would it impact everyone in the entire
Correct.
economy as material conditions?
Yes.
I mean, I think first of all, if you look at certain sectors of the economy, they have a huge number of immigrants working there. I think we're already seeing some of this. First of all, restaurants. I think that restaurants lost a lot of people during COVID and they haven't been able to get them back. These are the delivery drivers. These are the people who are working in the kitchens. These are some of the waiters. And now they don't have enough people to continue operating. A lot of them are operating somewhere below the number of staff that they need to run efficiently. But I think a worse situation is in the farm economy, in agriculture. I think that if we didn't have enough people to run agriculture, and right now that is staffed with a lot of undocumented workers, but it's also staffed with a limited number of people in the H-2A program, which is the farm worker program. It's not that efficient. It's somewhat effective, but if we didn't have these workers, or if we didn't have also the undocumented workers, I think we would be paying 2-3 times as much in the grocery stores. And with inflation being where it is, we can't afford that right now.
And then he followed up with a comment of, this is a mixed bag. Free trade and neoliberalism has benefited the 100K up club and had a fucking dumpstered the 30K and below club. So I think these are fair comments to bring in. I don't want to be.
So, yeah,
Go ahead, Nate.
I'll take a couple of easy, quick stabs at this. So, okay, I want to be very clear. Yes, having high immigration affects low wages. I mean, there's no, I would never claim otherwise. I'm not going to try to say that having a larger labor pool does not also create a different distribution of winners and losers inside the economy. That's true. I mean, that's true. However, that reality cannot be looked at in a vacuum. And so, and this is kind of what Jenny was just talking about. If you start to crush labor, and so this is really, really important to understand, right? Like, humans who have been trying to pay attention to how economies work since the beginning of time see economies having 3 inputs: land, labor, and then capital, right? And that includes tech, right? Capital is included in tech inside of capital. And if you have a perpetually shrinking labor pool, your economy is dying. So you might be able to have a short-term win situation for native-born citizens if you decided that you wanted to put the stop on an influx of labor into the United States. But no country on earth has been able to have a negative population growth and have a growing economic pie. So you get a short-term win for low-skilled labor in the short term, and I mean like 8 years, maybe. And then the longer you go on with that, the more you will make everyone impoverished. It's happened to every country on earth. Now, I also want to say, I'm deeply sympathetic to sort of a feeling of total betrayal by the globalist system, okay? That's a slightly different question, though. I don't like the idea of illegal immigration getting rolled into our trade policies with China. I do not believe those things are the same thing. I just don't. I think having labor come into the United States is way better than shipping jobs out of the United States, right?
Bingo.
Think about it. A Mexican worker comes into the US, he takes a job, this person takes a job, oh no, takes a job, and then he becomes a renter, and then he becomes a consumer, and then he becomes a taxpayer in the base, right? And then he coaches your kid's soccer team, and then he goes to your church and basically saved the Catholic Church. I don't know how America would have a Catholic Church in the US without this Northern Triangle giving us millions of Catholics to fill the pews. So then you say there's a huge difference between that scenario versus Apple shipped a job to China, so all of the gains of labor and creativity stay in China, and then Apple's stock price goes up. So I'm totally fine to say that's a neo-lib awful scenario. Very happy to say that we've been betrayed as a country by some of our elites, and especially some of our monopolistic institutions. I'm fine to say that. I think it's a fair criticism. I don't think it's fair to say that our immigration policy is the same thing as that. And so if your position is, I want to crush all of our trade deals, I want to get rid of globalization, and I want to stop immigration, you have just said, well, I want to have a good 10-year run in the US, and then I want to watch us die. It'd be really cool to watch our nation completely die. I mean, it's just, to me, it's a little too much Fox News and a little too much Reddit, and not enough actually reading good classical economics. And so it's upsetting to me when people roll all that stuff together, because there is an anger in the country that is legitimate and valid, and it's totally pointed at the wrong place. And that, to me, is what kind of gets me going about this.
Yeah,
and I would also add that if you look at manufacturing, it is shrinking as a segment of the economy, and it's been shrinking for decades. And whether or not you have free trade, that is not going to impact what percentage of an economy manufacturing is. This is across the board. This is in every country. And automation is replacing a lot of humans in the manufacturing process. That is a huge component here. If you look at the service component of the economy, that's growing. And also, let's talk about trade unions. I mean, the union membership has been shrinking. That definitely plays a role here, and it's partially due to regulations by various states that are very anti-union. And what you need, if you want to have someone fighting for workers' rights and to make sure that there's enough jobs, including in the Rust Belt, is you need to have unions on your side. You need to make unions grow. You need to make unions work for the economy that we have now, not the economy that we had in the 70s or the 60s.
Hell to the yes. I'm 100% on board with what both of you have said about this. But that's because I am a lib cuck and, well, fuck me, right? So, but go ahead, Tiberius.
Yeah, I want to get on this one because I'm not going to try to turn this into a debate, but I want to make my thoughts known on this one. I think immigration's generally a net good, but it's a long-term net good. Where Nate is kind of talking about, it's like, hey, you get a short-term net good if you are anti-immigration, and then it kind of goes to hell. I actually agree with that, but when it comes to immigration as a whole, where you have an influx of people, generally it falls into one or two things. You have wave immigration, which is you get about a couple million people or an entire segment of a population rolls into your country. They take about 20 years to quote unquote digest into the body politic writ large, whether that's economically, politically, socially, what have you, and then they're like full-blooded Americans. We've gone through this like 4 times now, or 3 times already. This is our 4th stint in this. I think we're going to be fine with that. And I don't think that actually hurts the great US of A at all. What I do think, and where I absolutely disagree with anyone who's like for free trade, is that putting the United States on the same economic exchange group as 3 billion East Asians who live off of basically $2 a day, there is no way that you are going to be cost competitive in that environment. And that is why I think that you've seen manufacturing in the middle class just completely get eviscerated here in the United States. When people can do it and you pay them nothing for that, how do you make that work in your pocketbook? And the reality is that that was the offshoring thing. And I blame big business. I blame Reagan. I blame the GOP to a large degree for shipping your jobs overseas. But on the other side of that is that I'm going to take shots at the Democrats, at the unions. You guys, or not you guys, if you are a Democrat, y'all lost unions. They're now voting Republican. So I'm kind of sitting here going, all right, well, let's figure out who's got the economic bag down, because I agree with Nate in that everything is moving politically to where the parties are going to realign. And I'm quite curious to see where that goes. But yeah, anyway, immigration good, free trade bad. And I'll end with that.
Fair enough. Just one thing that I wanted to bring up is that from what I'm hearing from everybody that just spoke is that basically what Tiberius just said is that, immigration good, free trade bad. We need to go back to an insourcing model of the economy where we bring people in to fill jobs that we need and bring in their talents and everything else like that to make a better America, and stop exporting our talents and our goods, and well, not our goods but our jobs to overseas and to frankly countries that really are competitors to a large extent. I'm looking at China, I'm looking at Russia, I'm looking at India to a lesser degree, but not everybody's on board with the whole liberal world order, and that's something that we need to take into account.
Speaking of that, I do want to pick up on something that Jenny said earlier, and I'm going to try to quote this as directly as I can. The United States government's really good at bringing in high school immigration, and I actually agree with that. Full stop. The United States is actually probably the world's best brain drainer you could possibly find, whether it is particularly Indians, Chinese, and people from East Asia that are kind of impoverished, and when they go through the academic systems, they come here, but they stay here.
Yep.
And she probably can actually tell you better than I can. Maybe I'm wrong, but I believe the vast majority of the H-1B has come out of South Asia and Southeast Asia for the better part of the last 30 years.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. South Asia is one of the biggest components of the H-1Bs. And in fact, when you look at green cards through employment-based cases, there's a lot more green cards being issued to South Asians. Also, I mean, Mexicans, Filipinos, but Chinese, but especially Indians. There's actually huge backlogs because the US government has a policy that promotes diversity. And so for that reason, they only give out a maximum of 7% of all of their green cards each year to people from any one country. And so there are huge backlogs for Indians where they have to wait like 10 plus years in order to finally get their green card because of those limitations, those per country limitations.
And Jenny, before I take you off the big screen, can you expand upon why those limitations exist to a degree, if you know?
Well, I mean, it's really because the U.S. government has decided from a policy perspective that they want to promote diversity. And so they don't want to have people from any one country representing too big of a component of their immigrants who are coming into the United States and staying here. And there's a lot of people who actually really disagree with that policy.
Right.
So there's recently a lawsuit actually to try to change those per country limitations so that Indian nationals in particular don't have to wait so long in order to get their green cards. But so far that hasn't been successful. So we're at where we're at. There is actually a whole separate visa category just to promote diversity, and it will basically let anybody who has certain minimum requirements, like they have a degree or they've attended high school and have a certain amount of work experience, called the diversity visa, and it favors people from countries that are underrepresented coming in as immigrants.
Is that the lottery system, the diversity lottery system?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, the reason I asked about whether or not you knew it specifically is because to me, this seems like it's a holdover from the huge immigration reform of the 1960s. Was it 67 Immigration Reforms Act? Is that the year?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay.
I'm not great on the history of each of the statutes.
That's fair. But to me, it's a holdover from that. And the reason that was a thing is because we just basically said, fuck anybody that wasn't white for the most part, and then let all those people in. And so we implemented this visa quota somewhat of a system to basically fix that issue. So.
Well, and yeah, I mean, also, if you look at, like, for example, the number of refugees, we don't have anywhere near the number of refugees coming in compared to some European countries. I mean, I do understand the concern about changing the makeup of the United States and or different communities and somehow making it feel like it's not the United States anymore, because culturally the burden shifts so much to the incoming population. I understand that idea, but I don't think we're approaching that in any way, shape, or form.
No, I think the United States actually does pretty good on the refugee resettlement process. They try to not, like, one of the things that it does better than most of Europe is that it tries not to, at this point, create ethnic enclaves. It tries to bring people into communities where their ethnicity or their cultural background exists, but not like everybody goes to that one area. It's like spread out so that you have some modicum of integration. At least that's my perspective of it. I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So we are just about at an hour when we actually officially started. Tiberius, it looks like Nate had to drop for us. Do you have any other questions, final thoughts, or anything you would like?
I had a wonderful question roll in from my chat that I really appreciated. So the question was for the panel: how does the panel view enclaves in their country? Do you view them as good or bad for the country? Should the government take steps to limit enclaves? And if anyone is wondering what they're talking about, they're largely talking about like ethnic or cultural enclaves where people who immigrate into a society largely stay as a pocket of that's or within that society. So you could talk about like an Asian town USA kind of a thing, or like Little Mexico, that kind of thing. What do you think about that? How do you feel about it? Was the question. I really wish Nate was still here for that, because I don't even think I know his answer.
That's a really awesome question. And, I have mixed feelings about it. I live in New York City, so I live in a place where there's a ton of enclaves, and, I can go to any neighborhood and, there's like so many different ethnic populations from so many different countries around the world. And, it's to me, it's like a beautiful, rich experience. But then sometimes you'll have a different situation where you'll have a group that's kind of settled maybe somewhere in the Midwest, where there's a little bit more of a conflict there, because you'll have, and I originally come from the Midwest, so I know the Midwest well, but it's a little bit more homogenous than New York City outside of the big cities. And so sometimes you'll get a situation where I think there could be some clashes or some discomfort, some difficulty. And I think that integration is really, really important. I don't know that the government can necessarily do a lot to enforce these things, other than just kind of being creative about encouraging people to mix. And, the segregation has been a huge problem in our country for decades. And I don't know if we necessarily have the magic number to fix that. But, I guess having sort of communities, encouraging them to do activities together, sponsoring cultural festivals. I think the schools could play a role in that, but there's a lot of sensitivity around what's happening in the schools right now. So I'm not sure, though that would be a perfect place, or public libraries, or, civic groups, encouraging civic groups that are receiving local funding to mix more with other groups, those kinds of things. I don't have the magic answer to that one.
So from my perspective, the best cure for this is cultural exchange. And I personally don't have anything against what Peacecraft said in chat, is that no such thing as quote unquote a Chinatown should exist. And the reason I say that is because as long as as long as there isn't any deep-seated cultural conflict, everything else is, for lack of a better term, this is what I've been calling it for a while, window dressing. And so, like, as long as those deep-seated cultural values are similar to a group of people, you can have multiculturalism, you can have pluralistic democracy without that butting head tension that might get if for example, a group of people is just completely 100% against all kinds of basic integration. You know, the saying "when in Rome, do what Romans do" thing kind of does, to an extent, make sense. Like, one of the issues that I know that New York has is with the Hasidic Jewish community. One I don't know the exact community, so I might be broad brushing a little too much. But they have basically where they've set up their own little religious town. But at the same time, you have the FLDS in Arizona and New Mexico that have done the same thing, and people seem okay with that. We have different religious groups in the United States that, you know, if they're not they're setting up their own little culty things, and no one seems to really bat an eye until it comes to a head. And, you know, what happens with cults happens with cults, I'll just say.
I think it's a balancing act to a certain degree. I mean, I know when I grew up, we all enjoyed bringing out the lutefisk at Christmas time.
Right.
We still kept some old traditions from a few generations back from my Scandinavian family, and that's fun. I mean, it's nice to remember the old country, or, you know, hear the stories from the older family members who can remember their grandparents who actually came over here. But, you know, you want to balance out this cultural richness with people who are really holding themselves apart to the extent where they're maybe trying to have different laws, or they expect themselves to be treated differently, because I think that can definitely create resentment, whether it's LDS or whether it's, whatever sect in Brooklyn. They had a wedding with 600 people unmasked in the middle of people dropping dead during COVID.
Right.
I think that's one of the core issues that comes up, is when people expect to be treated differently by the government. And then I think, maybe we have a problem some of the time.
I agree with that. I think we are actually out of time for this. Jenny, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with the audience?
No, except please call your senators and your members of Congress and ask them for comprehensive immigration reform, because the system is really broken right now, and we need to really focus on this, because this is going to create bigger and bigger problems going forward.
All right. Thank you for that. Tiberius, do you have any final thoughts?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Pro streamer. No, I don't have any final thoughts. I think everyone had something to add on to. It's a shame that Nate left us early, but I think this was actually a really good episode. I'm very happy to have had it. Jenny, it was absolutely a pleasure to meet you.
Great to meet you too. Thanks for having me.
And Jenny, please come by again. We're always glad that you are able to give your thoughts and insights to us on the program, because you're very knowledgeable about what you do and other things as well. So you're a delight to have on. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.